Welcome to episode 15 of That Moment Heart to Heart Talk with Dr. Victoria Gridman. I am your host, and I'm so excited to be here today with someone super special to me. She is my best friend. She knows too much, so therefore she will always be my best friend, and one of my most favorite colleagues and professionals. And her name is Polina Shkadron. Polina, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
You are so welcome. Thank you for being here. I am excited to have you on because, number one, there are people that are listening that will definitely benefit from your story. And I can't wait to get into it. And there are just so many amazing things that you do. And you're like a chef. You're not a baker where you follow directions. But you're like a chef in your profession where I think you put together so many incredible things and that don't usually go together. And you really are unique in what you do. So before I even go on, why don't you tell the world, who are you in this world? What do you do? What's so special?
So good morning, everyone. I'm Polina. And again, thank you for the introduction. I'm the owner of Play to Learn. And by profession, I'm a speech and language pathologist, and I'm also a nutrition educator. And that what I do, though, is really I intertwine so many different disciplines because of people like Victoria, who I know really well, and just my interest in so many other professions, especially in mental health and in occupational therapy. So I take all of these little pieces and they're all ingredients, and then I mix them up and I choose very specific ingredients for the clients that I work with. So there's a lot that goes into even planning a therapy session, and we can go on and on about, like,
I mean, you're not kidding. You literally stay in your office until 11 o'clock at night preparing for the next day. So It does take a lot. So who do you work with? Who are the people that you work with?
So mainly I work with young children and families. A lot of my clients are diagnosed on the autism spectrum. And I also work with really, really young kids, as young as 7 months, on feeding difficulties. And then I go for feeding therapy from anywhere to 6 to 7 months to all the way up to the teenage years. And as you could imagine, it's very different working on feeding with a 7-month-old than it is with a 14-year-old. So there's a lot of tools in my toolbox that I share with parents. And then I also work with kids who have language learning disabilities. I love working with that population also because it pushes me to be even more creative, especially now when the world is on teletherapy, and keeping kids engaged and still having them take away from the session what I would really want them to take away from it.
I love that. So for people who have no clue, because, you and I are special in the sense that we work with people who have feeding traumas and feeding challenges, and, food is, we can get into this a little bit later, but food and eating, so many cultural ramifications related to, right, with that. So, but when you say feeding challenges, what are you actually talking about? Like, can you give us an example of someone who you're working with who might be someone typical who comes to you?
Sure. So I've actually lately gotten newer clients with an array of, like we say, feeding challenges. So I have a little guy now who I just started with. He was diagnosed with autism a few months ago, and he's not even 2 yet, around the age of 2, and has a very restricted food repertoire. So the amount of foods that he eats and the variety is very restricted. So we're working using a very play-based approach, hence it's part of my part of everything I do. And it's so interesting because his mom told me the other day that she feels like she's the one who's also being desensitized to what we're doing, because we get really messy, and that's the way that he's finally exploring the foods that are around him. And that's a big part of what I do. It's not just the child comes in and eats. That's not really what feeding therapy is. It's the entire family unit. And when I take on a client, I have to make sure that the whole family is ready and they're ready to commit, because it's going to be a process. And I let them know that I'm going to change everything. Not all at the same time, but everything is going to change.
I got it. So I love this conversation because it really highlights how many different parts of the process of working with someone, working with a family, as it's not just working with that kiddo, it's working with the entire family. It's shifting beliefs, it's shifting behaviors and habits, and really being someone who does the therapeutic part, but also challenges the rule makers in the household, right? And that really takes a lot of collaborative work. So I want to actually weave in your title here, which is incredible because it speaks to what I think we as professionals who are integrative in our work, which means we create these experiences for our clients utilizing so many different modalities, and some of the challenges that we come up against in creating our identity to be there, to be those kinds of professionals. And so tell us a little bit about the quest for the link between autism, ADHD, and nutrition.
So it came about on a walk with another really good friend of mine who's a registered dietitian. And we were just bouncing ideas off in terms of like what we want, what the title of this talk was going to be. And we went deeper into why I became interested in nutrition anyway. And it dates back to probably 5, even 6 years ago, when I was actually interested in pursuing a PhD. And I was trying to figure out what my research perspective was going to be. And I knew that from what I've seen already in the field, you couldn't deny that there was something going on with the foods that certain kids gravitated toward, like kids with autism, kids with ADHD, some things that they were lacking in their diet. And I brought that up to the committee who was interviewing me. And unfortunately, I was told that that's impossible to research. So you know me, and I don't like impossible. I don't believe that.
I'm going to interrupt because for people who don't know Polina, there's nothing that Polina cannot do, especially if she's told she can't do it. So in that moment, for you, I mean, I remember that time. I was definitely in the midst of pursuing my own doctorate, and I remember your interest in really achieving that because, you know, it was something that you thought was really going to be a contribution. And when you were in that space and, you know, kind of going through that creative process for yourself, and you shared that very vulnerably with the committee that was interviewing you, what was that like to hear that feedback?
It was definitely, I want to say, like a little heartbreaking because it sounded a little harsh, and I had to keep my poker face on and go, oh, okay, no, I understand. Absolutely. There can't be a link. And and when I left, the only thing I could think of was, well, that's not possible. It's impossible that there can never be a link. And it's impossible that this research doesn't exist. So I started digging. I started digging on my own, and I wanted to see what really would set me apart even more in terms of being in this field. So I found a program, a master's program online through American University, which was actually really perfect because their focus was on nutrition education. And I feel like that's really part of what I do is I educate. Mm-hmm. And that's what we do. We're doing it right now, right? Like we're trying to educate the world in terms of, well, what is it that we do here and what makes what makes us so unique, and how did we find this road to discovery. So through that degree, and what I was able to do, which was really great, was that all of the coursework, and it was really intense. It was like 18 months of the most grueling process I think I've ever gone through. And what we were able to do was actually look into the research interests that we really wanted to focus on. And for certain courses, I looked into autism and gut health, and focus on studies and wrote a paper on that. And then for a life cycle nutrition class, which was probably one of my favorites, I focused on ADHD and the lack of omega-3 fatty acids in diets of children with ADHD. And so that's how all of this came together.
So I love that, because you found a way. And going back to, that moment, is that moment in the past now? Is it something that fuels you? I mean, it sounded like it was this disappointing moment that then ended up fueling your quest for this link and really creating where you are today.
I think it's definitely, I've left it in the past, and I feel like I've moved forward so much from back then. We were in 2021, and like I said, this was probably over 5-6 years ago, and now more than ever I feel like so empowered. And the parents and the families who work with me, they also get that sense of empowerment, and I really can do this, and this really is different. So that's really part of what I want to do for other families.
Can you tell us a story about like one story? You have so many, because we have so many. But if you could just take a moment and think about one story that really highlights, maybe it started as a struggle and maybe a real challenge, and when they came to you, and then it's really blossomed into something that you consider a huge win for them and for you.
So I have a couple that I'm thinking, a couple of stories. So one was a little girl who I started with when she was around the age of 2, and she was typically developing in all other ways, except for the fact that all she ate was rice cakes. So
were they chocolate rice cakes?
No, not even chocolate, just plain rice cakes.
Oh,
it was just plain rice cakes. And it took us about 1.5 years of really, and this is what I mean when we talk about commitment, and everybody was committed. The parents were committed, the grandparents were committed, the extended family was committed, right? So everybody was committed in helping this little girl and family to really expand and show the parents that this really is possible. So, and the process is definitely, it's not a quick fix. And that's something that I tell people all the time that I can't offer. So if you're looking for that, then I'm not the person for you.
And that's super honest.
Mm-hmm.
That's super, super honest, because, it's like a sales, like we've got it all, and we can like wave a magic wand. And the truth is that therapeutic work is not waving a magic wand. No. And so I love that you just said that. Mm-hmm.
So it took us some time. At the end, the approach is it's strategic. It's definitely slower. It's respecting the boundaries of the kids. I think we forget that a lot of times, that children have their own boundaries also, and we can't just go in there and say, okay, well now these are new rules and you have to follow all of them. But also, that's why the process is also slower, because the child has to trust me. And I tell families that all the time, that sometimes there's broken trust when it comes to mealtime, and it could be a little bit more difficult at home and sometimes easier for me at the office, because I'm starting on a blank slate. The child has no reason
to stop you and ask a question. Yeah. So going back to children have their own boundaries, that makes all the sense in the world to me. But for those that might be listening who don't know what you mean by that, because they might perceive children as not having boundaries, or they don't really know what boundaries are, so why consider them? And, those kinds of questions. What would you say to explain what you mean by that?
Well, what I mean by that is that I love the no phase. When they start developing that no phase, for me, it's one of the most important developmental phases, because they're establishing themselves as little human beings, and they're reaching that state of autonomy, and they're going, well, I have my own ideas and I have my own wants, and I'm going to show you what they are. So that's the boundary they're creating. And if we ignore those or override them, and we'll talk about what that is when it comes to mealtime, when we override those boundaries, what we're telling kids is that I know what you're going through better than you do. I'm the expert on you, which is definitely not the case.
And that's not what we want that's not to the benefit of the child either, right? Because lots of times we think kiddos are just these, they're already developed, but really they are developing beings. And so part of their development is that no phase. At first I thought you said face. I'm like, there's a no face? I don't know something, but you said phase, right? So, and it comes with a no face, which is kind of cute too. But developing an understanding of our kids and their no phases, and that the no phase is something to be respected, and, to teach kiddos when they can, we stop and they can begin and they can make their own choices. And I love that. I think it's one of the most important developmental understandings about kids. Yeah,
definitely. And we'll come back to that. We'll bring that in to what it means when kids say no and push food away, because that's a big that's something else that we handle all the time. And that's what a lot of the parents come to me and saying, well, they don't want this food on their plate, and they push it away and they say no, and what do I do? So going back to this little girl, and we actually were able to phase out after about a year and a half, because we hit a really great stride and she started doing really well. And it was really because everything that I did with her was hands-on. So even at, the age of 2.5, she was participating in making the foods, and she was watching and understanding that something goes from being raw to being cooked, and experiencing all the feels and all of the textures, the flavors, the smells, visually. All of our senses are involved in mealtime. So if you can imagine, we took her from rice cakes, which then the parents said to me, those were really dark times. Like I'm never gonna forget that. I thought it was so funny. And for them, and it also helped me realize, like, oh, that's what they felt like back then. They felt like they were in dark times because their child just wouldn't eat anything except for just plain foods, rice cake, rice, anything that was flavorless. And then what she started enjoying was anything from like asparagus to cauliflower to fish, to things like her foods being mixed, and her saying that things were her favorite. So that was also a really big win, I think, for us as a team. And I consider myself and the family and the child, we're all a team in this. So for the team, that was a really big win, was that she can come to the table and choose from anything that was available on the table. And the parents knew that and they also began to trust in the fact that she understood her hunger and satiety cues. And that's something that I
don't think I understand those yet for myself.
It's so funny you say that, because that's something when it comes to intuitive eating and like mindful eating, which, I mean, you work with mindfulness all the time. When it comes to mindful eating, and there's a big difference between being mindful and being mindless when we consume foods. And we've spoken about this before. One of my biggest rules is that there's no electronics at meals, because when
people just who were watching are probably no longer watching.
There's no electronics during mealtime. There's no electronics during mealtime, because then you turn the focus away from the meal to distract. And the point is that the food is the star of the show. The meal is the star of the show. And even if the child isn't eating and sitting at the table, that's still part of mealtime, and that's still something that we work on. It's the whole family then is having a conversation, and it doesn't have to be about food. It's about your day and what you did. And if the child isn't verbal, meaning like the child doesn't have words yet because they're young, they're playing around with the foods that's around them. Yeah. So they're still part of that family mealtime experience, which I think is huge.
So what you're really talking about, because as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking these dark times, and then you really bring, and it's funny, but I mean, that's what it feels like, right? Because when you feel like there's no hope, you feel helpless. I remember, a parent speaking to me about feeling like they were a chicken with their head cut off, or like a chicken in a cage, right? Like not knowing, and if you can imagine a chicken in a cage and can't move, can't get out, can't fly, right? Just almost helpless, not knowing what to do. And because of the anxiety for parents, they have that difficulty intervening in a calm, sort of thoughtful way, because they really, really want their child to just improve, right? And so I can imagine taking a child from rice cakes to being able to have a better palate than I do, and I'm a big foodie, right? Is just incredible. That's really a lot of growth through something so difficult. Do you have another story for us? Maybe something.
I do have another story, and this is it's a little bit different, because this boy came to me when he was around the age of 5 and diagnosed with autism, and he was only on purees. So didn't know how to chew. And I thought that was so interesting, because our first, and I'll never forget this was at my old office location. So our first meeting, the evaluation that we had like, he wouldn't come to the table. So we had a little picnic, and he vomited everywhere. I was like, this is a great start. The parent will never hire me. Her kid just threw everything up all over. And then they were with me for like over 2 years.
Wow.
And again, like very, very committed family. And what we were able to do, well, for this boy who was already 5, think about all of the experience that he's already had ingrained in him in those 5 years of being alive, right? So it's my role to override those past experiences and override that fear, because to him, food was scary. Didn't know what to do with it when it entered his mouth. He didn't know what would happen. And we had to work through, and this is where a lot of my interest in mental health comes in, and the certification that I have in family trauma. The reason that I went that route was because there's a lot of focus on mealtime and what happens to the body when the child is participating in the meal and they are stressed. So the digestive system just shuts down. And when the child isn't hungry anymore, and the parents say, well, how come they're not hungry? They can be, they didn't eat all day. Well, you just stress the entire body. And in order to protect itself, the body goes, well, what systems do I not need? Oh, digestion. I don't really need that right now. So I'm going to shut it down. When our digestive system is shut down, we lose our appetite. Stress tends to do that for younger kids. So this little guy was so afraid of new foods, and because again, he just didn't know what would happen. So we started with foods that melt, and he had a saying, and I love him. He had a saying. He goes, "Everything melts in your mouth." Everything melts, and I go, "Yes, everything melts." So all of the foods that I was first introducing to them were things that would just would melt with saliva, or if you leave it in your mouth a little bit longer, it would just melt. And for a while, that was the process that we had to take. And a really big moment for him was, I think they were out on a boardwalk somewhere, I think maybe in Coney Island, back in the day.
Let me figure out. Yeah.
Oh, back in the day. And I remember the mom saying that they were taking a walk on Coney Island on the boardwalk, and this little boy's dad bought cotton candy. And the first thing he asked when he looked at it, he goes, "Does that melt in your mouth?" And they go, "Yeah, it does." He was like, "Oh, okay, then I can have it." Like, took a huge piece and put it right in his mouth. And the mom told me that she started to cry, because that was really one of those first moments that he was really interested and curious about something that he's never had before. So we took him from that to, if you can imagine, eating sandwiches.
Ooh. That does not melt in your mouth.
No, sandwiches.
Unless it's an ice cream sandwich, half of that melts in your mouth.
Yeah, so sandwiches, broccoli, any type of grain that you can think of. He was open to everything. Salmon.
Incredible.
It was incredible. It was really incredible. And he even told the story that his mom said that one of his friends in school asked him what his favorite food was. And he said that he really likes broccoli and asparagus. Like, those are his favorite foods. Wow. And he's like, "I don't really eat hot dogs. I don't like, that's not really what I like."
Wow.
So for me, that's a win.
Yeah. Something that you keep bringing up, and we talk about this often as well, is in our society, and maybe it's just our Western culture, but we are so prone to doing things that are quick fixes. When I talk to physicians, or I talk to, functional, doctors, and, just integrative therapy, they all, everybody wants this quick fix Band-Aid for different things. And with our system and funding and just how certain systems work, it's the quick fix sort of approaches that really do survive and thrive for many different reasons. And we don't really have to get into that today. But one of the things that you keep bringing up is the commitment piece of the work, right? And it's really what I say and call trusting the journey. And there's a piece of our work that I think you do masterfully in really giving space to the parents to, understand the importance of consistency and commitment. Because when we trust the journey, we start to see the gains along the way. And it doesn't always come in the beginning of the work. Sometimes it's in the middle and towards the, towards the deep end of it.
Right.
But if you stay there and if you stay committed, you really do see the gains. And, I definitely see that in my work with clients. And what's something that you do that really communicates that message to parents, especially parents who feel they've done it all, they don't have the investment, time, or energy to spend on something long-term? What do you say to them? Because on one hand, you can get frustrated, like a lot of professionals do, and say, go somewhere else, right? I don't want to deal with this. But what we really want is to help the child.
Yeah.
Right. And in order to help the child, we do have to deal with and find creative ways to really support the parents to understand. I know that you don't see this journey. I do, because I've seen. And so how do you do that? How do you have that be communicated?
Well, it's interesting because you say trust the journey, and I say trust the process. And this is also why, especially for younger kids, I have the parent in the room with me all the time. And again, especially for something like a feeding therapy session, so that we start, it happens really naturally, actually, through conversation, through interactions, and through certain moments that occur, either, if we're at the table, or if we're on the floor. And in those moments, I can just look at the parent and point and go, this is what's happening right now. Just stand back. stand back and watch, because this moment, this is exactly what we're looking for. And then I see like the nods, and then I see the light bulb of, oh, this is it. So it might not happen the first session. If it does, fantastic. And what I love is that the parents who really come on board, they reach out because they've heard, there's been talk. People have spoken about me. And maybe it's taken them, for some, it's taken them a year to actually make that phone call. And I've been on their mind, and now it's now or never kind of situation. And even then I say, like, you trusted in me enough to give me a call. You trusted me enough to come in and meet me and have me meet your child. So give me some time. And that's all I really ask for is that trust. And it's so interesting you say that, because I have a new little girl that I started with. She's 5, on the autism spectrum, and the parent reached out to me a year ago, and we didn't, it didn't work out. And then she reached out again, and they came in, and she told me, she goes, in 5 minutes of being with you, you've just figured her out, and you've taught me things in 5 minutes that I don't think I've heard about in all the years and all the therapies that she's had. And then she goes to me, she's like, so everybody knows this? And it's so funny, because I know that you and I talk about this all the time. And in my mind, everybody does. And the more people I meet, I realize that not everybody knows. Not everybody knows this, like the secret formula.
Yeah, exactly. I love that. And so what would you say, going back to people out there, and it may not be a mental health professional, but someone who is, because you're a speech and language pathologist who also works with nutrition, and you are thorough in your understanding of trauma and how that interacts with everything. Mm-hmm. And so what would you say to someone who is, a speech and language pathologist, or someone who has a degree, but they want to explore the intersection of things, but the outside world keeps telling them that's not what you do? What would you say to someone who's really looking to branch out and spread their wings when they feel sort of confined into a certain position or role?
I would just say you have to go out and explore what it is that you really want. And you can't really be like a jack of all trades, for instance. And I absolutely know that I'm not, and I wouldn't want to be. So we all have, the field of speech-language pathology is just so broad, which makes it so unique, and that you can honestly work with any population you can think of. Right? And for that reason, if there's something that you're really, really interested in, you just go out and get it. That's really it. I mean, it doesn't have to be more complicating than it is. It just, you're interested in, you have to go out and get it. And the other thing, though, is that you have to be committed to it. I feel like we talk about this often too, that we're just students for life. And that's something that I'm always searching for something else to learn. That's within my expertise and branching out a little bit, but is also that I can intertwine and bring into my own practice. So when I finished my nutrition education degree, I looked around and go, okay, what's next? Like, what else can I do next? So it's not like I'm not looking to slowing down and stopping the learning process, just because I feel like when we do, we become stagnant. And that's really a detriment to the profession, and it's a detriment to the families.
Yeah. One of the things I love about you, Polina, you're one of my best friends. And one of the things I love about you is just how committed you are. I know that every time I call you just to catch up, right, there's always going to be the largest segment of our call where you're talking about your itty bitty client that you love so much.
I love my itty bitties.
so small. But what I love about that for people who don't know you the way that your clients and I do is there's the expertise, but then there's also this deep commitment to getting through, regardless of who you're working with. And what I know in the field of autism or the field of special needs in general is that there's not one client who's the same, so there's no like one template where you're like setting up for a feeding, therapy, and then like it's the same setup for the next kid. You literally meticulously look for things for each specific child, and you prepare so, diligently for everybody. And there's so many different things in the air, the collaboration with the parents, with other professionals, and sometimes dealing with the nonsense that comes up, with all of that. So I think just overall, you're a great model for what it means to be a true dedicated professional. And I think the families that you work with are incredibly lucky. I can't wait to have children so you can treat them.
Well, it's so funny you say that, because the prep that goes into any session, and I would say especially a feeding therapy session, is like sometimes I'll just walk into Whole Foods or walk into a supermarket, and I'll walk down the aisles and go, okay, what is something new? Who am I looking? I like shop for my clients rather than myself.
I know. And I say, are you eating dinner tonight? Oh, I forgot. Yeah. I love that. And you really do create, you're very creative, and you create a sense of curiosity that I think children learn best in, this just realm of curiosity. And, you create this environment where kids are just like, we would have kids outside in a playground digging dirt with sticks and just like learning in their environment. You really do the same thing in your sessions, and it's incredibly inspiring and humbling. Yeah. And so I would love for you to share a little bit about what you're up to and what people need to know about and how they can reach you.
So what I'm up to is just continuing to do what I do every day. And I've had, interestingly enough, more inquiries coming about with feeding therapy lately. Something's in the air. Something's in the air, or something's in the water, something's going on. And I really love also lately taking on just like a one-time screening, which is just a brief, hour evaluation, whether it's in an itty bitty for language, or a younger child for feeding, and taking on and spending that hour with the child and the family, and then actually giving them a plan to follow through at home, and giving them time with strategies, with an outline of, this is what I saw, these are the skills that we want to work on, and this is what I'm envisioning for the future. So it's really, at the end of the day, up to the family to do the carryover. And I think that's something that I've grown even more interested in, is having a family come in and going, well, I know that I can help you, and I also want you to have the tools to do it on your own, and why not give you the tools right now? Yeah. And then come back to me in a month and let me know how things go, and reach back out. And if you need to come in for like another session, we'll schedule that. And I've seen that the past three or four families that have come to me like that, that's been really more fitting for them and for their needs. Also, I think really, really important. So that I feel like some parents, and you tell me if you find this in your practice also, when they come in, they're thinking, am I going to be in therapy forever? Is this a forever thing? Like, this is never going to end. This is just forever. So it's, well, come in once, let me show you, and then I'll give you tools. I'll write out a plan for you, and then you could always come back.
I love that so much. Yeah. And giving people options, right? I always say
Absolutely.
my job is really to make myself obsolete. So you really don't need me. And what better way than to really provide that empowerment up front. And then if people do need support, really making it easy for them to come back and share that with you. I love that. So I would love for you to leave us with maybe something that you would love for everybody to know, or a mantra or a quote or something that you just think, everyone should have top of mind.
What everybody should have at the top of their mind. It's like, I don't really know if I have a mantra. And for me, it's mostly like, let kids be kids. And also just more be the observer a little bit more. So take a step.
That was a mic drop. Be the observer. Yeah, that was great. Perfect.
Be the observer. And then I also tell parents that silence a lot of the times is just golden. Silence really is golden. And take a step back and see what your child can do on their own. Because that's one of the pieces that I think when kids are in therapy all the time and all of these different therapists come in, and it's just something that actually came up late. Recently, I started seeing a 10-year-old girl, and my first question was, well, when does she have time to just be on her own? And the answer that I've gotten was never. She's never just left alone. And I feel like that's such an important part of the developmental process is let the child be and just see what it is that interests them and what excites them and what is it that brings them joy. And that's something that's actually one of my goals for 2 of my clients is I'm determined to find something that brings them joy. Like it's not about they're going to talk and they're going to go to college. I'm going to find something that brings them joy, because from that moment when I find it, then that's where everything else is going to slowly start to fall into place.
I love that so much, because that really is the motivator, right? Is teaching kids, do what brings you joy. Don't do it just because I say do this. And I think because we want kids to excel and be great, right? We sometimes tend to be pushy. And so that is an incredible piece of advice. Thank you. Well, thank you for whoever told you that the link can't be made, because it created just you to be stronger, more empowering, and just an incredible force. I love you. Thank you for being part of this interview. You have some amazing knowledge. And yeah, we'll talk soon.
Sounds great.